Welcome to the Faith and Liberty Talk Show, where faith and liberty meet. Our host is Dave Garrison from Ohio Christian University, a longtime Fortune 100 company top executive and a former U.S. congressional candidate from Texas. Our goal for the Faith and Liberty Talk Show is to give you an opportunity to listen to interviews and discussions with significant authorities and experts on subjects related to Christians engaging in the civil and political arena. The mission of the show is to give you real information and not sound bites that you can really use. We have a website for the show, faithandliberty.org. At this website, you can obtain more information about the show, our guests, subscribe to our newsletter, and become a friend of the show, and like us on our Faith and Liberty Facebook page. You can also access all of our previous shows. Please keep in mind that the Faith and Liberty Talk Show exists only with the generosity and support of our listeners. If our show is of value to you, we would appreciate you visiting our website, faithandliberty.org, and donating to the show. Now, let's begin today's show. Thank you for joining us.
We're here today with one of the guests that I've been wanting to have on the show since we started the show a little over a year ago, and it's Dinesh D'Souza. And I imagine every conservative that's listening to this show knows who he is. He's had a 25-year career as a best-selling author, scholar, public intellectual, filmmaker. I believe you actually started getting people's attention, didn't you, Dinesh, when you were in the Reagan White House? Would you tell us what you were doing there?
Yeah, I was a young policy analyst in my 20s, a little bit after college. The world was changing in important ways. Soon after Reagan, the Berlin Wall came down, the Soviet Empire disintegrated. I was in domestic policy, so I was dealing with issues of taxation and welfare, those kinds of things. And so, but watching these larger events with great interest.
How much contact did you have with the president?
Very limited. There's a hierarchy in the White House, and I worked for something called a Domestic Policy Council. And so I got to stand in the back of the room and watch, Reagan do his thing. But I didn't interact directly with him. I interacted with the domestic policy advisor, and then he interacted with Reagan.
But you were able to observe him in a setting that he could be himself.
Yeah, I actually years ago wrote a book called Ronald Reagan, How an Ordinary Man Became an Extraordinary Leader. And in that book, I capture some of those moments because part of what I'm getting at in that book is to try to figure out how Reagan, who was the most whimsical and in a way implausible of presidents, was nevertheless immensely successful in achieving his goals. That was a remarkable era, and I think in some ways the Reagan era only ended in 2008 with Obama's election. And I think now we have to acknowledge that we are in a different era. And part of the challenge of conservatives has been to regroup after Reaganism and figure out how to respond to this new situation.
Yes, and I want to get into that with you, but I want the listeners to recognize in the impacts of some of these books. For instance, illiberal education. For many of us, that's what really alerted us to your intellectual prowess. The End of Racism. You've already mentioned Ronald Reagan, How an Ordinary Man Became an Extraordinary Leader. The Virtue of Prosperity. What's So Great About America? I love that title. I don't know who picked that, but that's a good one. Letters to Young Conservatives. I know that people like YAF and a lot of the college Republicans and people like myself push that book to our young folks. What's So Great About Christianity, I think really highlighted you as an apologist. Life After Death, even more. And the book that I just devoured when it came out was The Roots of Obama's Rage. And then finally, I guess your number one New York Times best-selling book was Obama's America, Unmaking the American Dream. Is that right?
Yes, that book came out in 2012, the election year, and of course it came out in tandem with the documentary film I released called 2016, which became a very successful documentary. So, yeah, I've written 12 books. I've done Christian apologetics for the past 5 years, and for most of my career, I've been thinking about these books and what unites them, because they're on different topics, as you say, from education to civil rights to Reagan to money, But I think my big topic is America. In other words, being an immigrant, having lived in a different culture, I feel I see America from the outside, but also from the inside, and that gives me a certain kind of bifocal or dual perspective that I think has informed all my work.
I want to really bring up that film that you were just talking about, 2016. It was in the movie theaters. Now, I've read two different things, and I'd like to know what the truth is. I read at one point it was the largest or top-grossing documentary over the last 30 years, and even beat out Sicko by Michael Moore. Is that correct?
Well, it's partially correct. The film is actually the second highest grossing documentary in American history. Now, number one is Michael Moore's film called Fahrenheit 9/11, which was strongly supported by the Democratic Party and by unions when it came out in 2004. Also, by the way, in an election year. Our film, in its gross receipts, did surpass Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth and a whole bunch of Michael Moore films from Bowling for Columbine to Sicko. So yes, we did surpass those Michael Moore films, but we did end up in the number 2 slot.
Well, that is fantastic. I took our pastor and some other people, and we went and saw it at the movie theater. And when I looked around, there were all these people from the community, Tea Party people, church people, what I would call, and a lot of other people would call, country club Republicans. It was really cool to see who was in the movie theater. So you did a good job. It was fascinating.
Well, thank you. We were helped a little bit by the media because, there's been such bad reporting on Obama and such an unwillingness to cover Obama. In fact, it's probably more accurate to say that, by and large, a lot of reporters cover up for Obama. They don't like to report damaging information. So we're in an unusual moment in our democracy in which normal press, checks on the government are not working right now. And Obama knows that, which is partly why he's, in a sense, operating in the manner he does, because he knows that no one's really holding him to account.
Yeah, Dinesh, that comes out when I've interviewed people like Chris Horner, who's done public records requests and find out all sorts of information, and it's blockbusting news and never reported. I think you're 100% correct. You were also the college president for King's College for a couple of years. And what are you doing now?
Well, I divide my time between books and lectures and movies. So those are my three main focuses. I'm releasing a film this year for the 4th of July that's called America. And the film is a patriotic film, appropriate to the 4th of July. But it's also going to be a very provocative and entertaining and thoughtful film. It isn't just rah-rah patriotism. It's looking at what are the forces that have built America into what it is, but also what are the forces that are pulling America down. And part of what I do in the film is take on the central moral thrust of Obamaism. And the central moral thrust of Obamaism is simply the allegation that wealth is based on theft. Part of this is a historical argument that America, stole the country from the Indians and stole the labor of the African Americans through slavery, took half of Mexico in the Mexican War. But today, what that argument says is that capitalism, the free market system, is a form of theft, depriving people of what Obama calls their fair share. So this is a kind of moral attack on America, and it's one that has never really been answered, and it desperately needs to be. So that's what we're doing in the film.
I agree. I think that's going to be an excellent. I will definitely want to see that. Let's move into another way. I'm going to ask you about yourself. You're a fascinating guy. You're kind of a Renaissance man, but how do you like to be thought of? As a Christian apologist, a best-selling author, a political activist, a conservative intellectual? How do you like to be best described?
Well, I think for most of my career, I saw myself as a think tank guy, a scholar, but not a scholar ensconced in the university, but one that was in the public policy arena, kind of a public intellectual, if you will, mainly writing books. But I realize that the books, powerful though they can be, have a limited audience. There's only so many people who buy a hardcover book in America. I got the idea for the movie when I, in fact, thought about Michael Moore and the success of Fahrenheit 9/11. And so, for example, my last book, which was Obama's America, was number one on the New York Times bestseller list, sold, well, about 150,000 copies. But compare that with, with 2016, which has now been seen by about 8 million people. So it's a completely different level of exposure and reach. So I'm putting a lot of emphasis into films just because I recognize that they're a way, first of all, not only to communicate both on the intellectual level and on the emotional level, but also just to reach a much wider audience. I got involved in Christian apologetics almost accidentally. I know from Washington, D.C., I know Christopher Hitchens, and when I saw him out there raging against God, in fact, he was sort of debating a pastor from Birmingham, I believe, and, making the guy look really foolish. And I just got the idea, I'll jump into this arena and take this guy on. So I started debating some of the new atheists and then wrote a couple of books on Christian apologetics. It almost turned out, as I say, I almost accidentally got into it, but of course it was a way to bring my faith and my work closer together.
This whole Christian apologetics and how well you do it and some of the others, if we can get that more into the churches, into the young Christians, and they hear the logic that you guys are able to use and the illogic exposed by some of these atheists, the light is shown on the truth, I think. Let me jump into something else before we get in a whole host of other subjects. And I'm sure listeners would probably want me to ask something about this, but I want to do it this way. You've been a national figure, loved by conservatives and evangelicals, and still loved by conservative and evangelicals. Has some of the shine gone off lately with a couple of events in your life, or is there a lot of misinformation from the media?
Well, I put it this way, I've been, in some ways, I might be innocent or naive about this, but I tend to, when I get into something, I put myself completely on the front line. So, for example, on the Obama stuff, when I started 2016, I was really digging into Obama's life. I was down in Kenya talking to his grandmother. I found his brother in the slums of Nairobi.
Yeah.
I interviewed him. That movie, rattled Obama, and we know that because Obama, came railing against it on his personal website, which is barackobama.com. You can see his, fulminations against me and the film. In fact, I was talking to my mom, and she's like, "Oh, son, you probably didn't realize when you left for America that you'd be attacked by name by the President of the United States."
Really?
So it's been an interesting, tenure on the front line. Now, the thing about it is when you do that, you do become a target, and you become a target, sad to say, not just of the Obama people, but of, some vindictive people on your own side. It's really incredible. So, for example, the King's College, issue that developed 2 years ago developed because of a vendetta on the part of the editor of World Magazine, a guy named Marvin Olasky, who used to work for the King's College and kind of left in a huff when I came as the president. So there's a lot of dirty stuff that goes on within the Christian community. It's very underhanded. It's very low.
Yeah.
But the ordinary Christian is probably not aware of it.
Right.
I didn't really come out of that church world, so I was a little surprised by the kind of backdoor fighting that goes on in Christian politics. I try to stay above all that, and frankly, I don't actually care that much about it. So, but it is worth noting because I think, you've been enough in the world to know that is a reality. It's an unfortunate thing. We talk about Christian brotherhood and us all being on the same side, but all the low human motives of, malice and jealousy and so on are all
envy,
just as badly present on our team as they are on the other side.
I agree, and that, to me, does hurt the cause of Christ. Here's something, though, that I've experienced in a much smaller way than you have. And I've been a top executive in a Fortune 100 company, a couple of them, and I see what fame and ego does to people. Has that ever been a temptation for you?
In a human sense, I would say yes, it's unavoidable. I haven't been for most of my life I'm certainly not a household name. I had a sort of regional celebrity with my books. I think it's reached a bigger level because of the film, simply by virtue of being, one funny thing about being in a film is, theatrical screens are huge, and so I was kind of laughing sitting in the theater. I mean, my head on the screen is 5 times the size of my whole body. So,
Sure.
You get recognized more and you're more out there and more visible. I try to keep a perspective about this, and at some level, I remain the kid that came to America at the age of 17. So part of this remains slightly surreal for me,
Sure.
and I try not to make it any kind of a big deal. I'm just thrilled to be able to do the kind of work I love to do, which is to read books and think and do my writing, and now to try to explain ideas through the medium of film. It's fantastic, and to me, it's part of from my life what's been great about America for me.
What do you do, Dinesh, to kind of keep centered?
Well, I mean, I try to. First of all, I try to have, I try to stay on track with my faith and reading scripture and kind of keeping balanced. Second of all, I think I do enough reading about other cultures and other times and places that I always try to keep a larger sense of perspective. Third, I've got very straightforward, family and friends that kind of keeps me straight and lets me know what's what. And all of this, I think, is these are balancing forces that prevent us from getting intoxicated one way or the other. To me, one of the problems with a guy like Obama is that he's intoxicated not only by power, but he's intoxicated by himself. You get the sort of sense that he, just absolutely has a big smile on his face when he looks in the mirror every morning, because like Muhammad Ali, he thinks he is the greatest. And he gets so pampered by the press that feeling is reinforced by all the sycophants around him. So it's a very unhealthy thing, because then it makes people do stuff that they wouldn't do if they were in a more normal frame of mind.
Yeah, and as well as I do, the higher you move up in an organization, even in a business, and you get moved up in the top echelon, you're living in the ivory tower and you have corporate jets at your access like I did, and people want to impress you and they're always wanting to compliment you. He's got to be having lots of people here that are saying oh, you're so wonderful, you're so great. And, it does look like it's gone to his head. I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you see these guys who run for president and you think, what gave that guy the idea that he could even be president? He's so unprecedented. And the answer is, his 20 aides who all told him that, he's unbeatable and he's the greatest, and, and that reinforced, so that this is what happens. People do get an unrealistic sense of themselves, and this is what causes them to do foolish things in public.
We are talking with Dinesh D'Souza, and we'll return shortly after a few messages from our sponsors.
Here's Bebo Norman for Compassion International.
Compassion's commitment to integrity is incredibly important to me, only because I, like many other people, can tend to be very skeptical of what relief organizations or what they're about or where the money goes and all of those things. And I just have seen firsthand what happens with the money that people give to compassion and the time that people give to compassion and the integrity that compassion uses in that process. It is what makes compassion effective ultimately. And it's effective in terms of handling people's money. It's effective in terms of handling these children and their relationships and their life and their emotions and their education and all of those things. But ultimately, the reason that it impresses me the most is because it is effective in having integrity is what makes things that are spiritual effective ultimately. There's no pretense. It is what it is. And that, to me, it makes offering the message of who Jesus is legitimate.
Make a difference today. Call Compassion now, 877-496-7016. That's 877-496-7016.
You are listening to the Faith and Liberty Talk Show. We hope you are enjoying this week's show. After a short break to hear from our sponsor, Ohio Christian University, we will rejoin our host, Dave Garrison, and this week's guest.
Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell are coming to Ohio Christian University Monday, April 21st at 6 p.m. Get your tickets today at ohiochristian.edu for this riveting event featuring Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell. Tickets are going quickly, so secure yours now at ohiochristian.edu to meet Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell at Ohio Christian University on Monday, April 21st at 6 p.m. Made possible by Millwood Inc., the Computer Workshop, and Christian Healthcare Ministries.
Ohio Christian University is one of the fastest growing universities in the nation, offering undergraduate and graduate degree programs fully online in the areas of business, psychology, chemical dependency counseling, nursing, and ministry. You can earn an accredited, relevant, and affordable online degree, all from the comfort of your home. Now is the time to prepare for your future and earn your degree with Ohio Christian University. Call today at 855-OCU-GRAD or online at ocuonline.com.
You are listening to the Faith and Liberty Talk Show, where faith and liberty meet. Now, back to the discussion with our host, Dave Garrison, and this week's wonderful guest.
And we're back now talking with our amazing guest, Dinesh D'Souza. Let's talk a little bit about some of your books, because I think you've done some fascinating things with them. Let's talk about illiberal education. What were your goals in writing that book?
Well, that book was the book that blew the whistle on political correctness. In a sense, I think it's accurate to say that I didn't invent that term. I heard it on the campus, but I made it famous. I put it out there, and it has now become part of our vocabulary. That book was looking at the way in which issues like affirmative action had surfaced on the campus, speech codes, racial separatism, all kinds of minority courses. So something big was afoot on the campus, and this book was just simply almost like a scouting report on what was going on the university front.
Have you thought about updating that book?
I've thought about it. It's we're a generation away from that now, and actually, my daughter is now a freshman in college, and so I'm through her experiences getting a glimpse of what the world of the campus is like now. I also speak on campus, and so I have a sense of the campus that way. Yeah, I've never gone back and sort of done a sequel or an update to illiberal education. I don't know if I ever will, but I retain, of course, an enormous interest in young people, and I'm also interested in the campus. My own life really shifted when I was a student at Dartmouth. I kind of caught the political bug. I became, in a sense, a young Reaganite in those years. So those years were important for me, and I retain an interest in them.
Well, you were even controversial at Dartmouth, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. We had a rebel conservative newspaper that was a thorn in the side of the college administration that was called the Dartmouth Review.
Way to go. I love it. I was talking with Glenn Meekum. He's a big entrepreneur. He sold a company for $473 million, software company had put together, and he was at Harvard. And one of the things that he said was, I began to notice that the smartest people, the most logical people, were conservatives. And whatever campus I went to, that's what I seemed to find. And then the other day I heard Dr. Jonathan Haidt, I think it is, and he's the one that's done the study on, I forget what the title of his book is. We'll put a link up to it. But why people are conservatives and why versus why people are liberals. And he says the studies show conclusively that conservatives, and particularly libertarians, are more intelligent than liberals. What do you think of that?
Well, I got to think about that a little bit. I do think this is more of a related point than a direct answer to you.
Okay.
But I do think that conservatives on the campus tend to become smarter because they are in the minority. So because their views are so taboo, in some ways they're pariahs, particularly on the very selective campus. They've got to become really agile. They've got to know why they believe what they do. They certainly have to be thoroughly familiar with what the other side believes, and they are. Meanwhile, the typical liberal is swimming in a very friendly pond. He or she doesn't, they can just mouth slogans and everybody nods. And so these people become just intellectually slack. And that's a big advantage for me, by the way, when I debate these guys, because literally sometimes I'll make a point and I look at them and they look like I've slapped them because they've never heard of it.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, every single point that they make, not only have I heard of, I've heard about it like ad nauseum. So I'm very familiar with what they say. They're not familiar with what I'm saying, and that actually gives me an advantage. So I think that there's something in the structure of the political bias on the campus that makes conservatives better informed and more articulate.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people quote us saying it's not exactly political correctness, but it's the tolerance. And I have said a couple of times, tolerance to a liberal means if I can get you to agree with me or stop you from giving your opinion, then I might be able to believe the lie that I'm telling myself. How does that strike you as tolerance in America that liberals want to push? Yeah,
well, I certainly agree that by and large, the concept of tolerance is a bit of a rarity on the left. It's supposed to be a liberal virtue. Conservatives are always accused of intolerance, but most conservatives that I'm familiar with are actually in person quite tolerant. They're quite tolerant of gays that they know. They're quite tolerant of, I think they're tolerant in part because they have a low view of human nature. They expect human beings to fall down every now and then. They're pleasantly surprised when they get up. So this gives conservatives a kind of sympathy for human fallibility. Liberal tolerance, I keep hearing about it, but I rarely see it. And in fact, liberal intolerance is what I'm used to.
Yeah, that's pretty mind-blowing, actually. And I'm going to overstate this in order to ask the question. Do you believe that mainstream education in the U.S. is brainwashing our children that are going to these colleges?
Well, I recently debated the former radical terrorist, Bill Ayers at Dartmouth, and I asked him in that debate. This is, by the way, a guy who's now a professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago, influential theorist of elementary and secondary education, and by the way, for a friend and mentor to Barack Obama. So I asked Ayers, you in the old days, you were like a bin Laden guy. You were bombing the Pentagon, bombing the U.S. Capitol. And I said, have you given up those revolutionary beliefs? And he said, no. He said, I believe the same things now that I believed then, but I've got a better way to do it. I don't go around bombing buildings. Basically what he said is I've become a teacher. So I now carry these ideas into the classroom and I teach young people, and we can have social transformation that way. It's a better way than the old way. So he's, in a way, learned a better strategy to achieve the same goals.
Why wasn't that statement put all across the news everywhere in America? Don't you think that is really newsworthy?
If you go on my website, which is just
DineshD'Souza.com,
you can watch the debate. You can actually hear Bill Ayers talk about his beliefs and about what he's doing now and his view of America. And, as I say, we're putting out this big film called America the middle of this year. So we're going to give a very fresh and powerful perspective to try to, wake up people and give them a sort of new sense not only of what's wrong with America, but also what's right with America.
Doesn't it frustrate you, though, when, these blockbuster statements are made like Bill Ayers did to you? And I saw the video on your website. And again, we'll put a link up to everything you and I bring up so that people can go to our website and find it, including links to your books and all that, because I think it's important for our listeners to get a little bit better informed on that. But if a conservative makes kind of any offhanded comment, man, it's everywhere in the media. But when one of their guys, like Bill Ayers, says something like that, nothing. And, it bothers a lot of people.
Our own side is to blame a little bit for that because we don't do, and I say we generally, don't do enough reporting. We don't dig out facts sufficiently. Think about the scandal, the so-called scandal with Chris Christie and the bridge.
Yeah.
If that had happened to Barney Frank or Nancy Pelosi, it would never be in the paper because no one would ever find out about it.
Well, Rick Santorum, when I interviewed him, he said it repeatedly. The other side wants it more. they are more motivated for what it is that they believe and want. That's his view. And, there may be some truth to that. I want to go into a totally different area. I've attempted to find Christians who are experts in Islam, but there are kind of few and far between. And I think you debated Robert Spencer, somebody I've interviewed on the show. Why are you willing to write books and speak openly or unflattering about Islam, knowing that that might have some personal risk?
I grew up in a country, India, that is 80% Hindu, but about 15% Muslim, and that's a lot of Muslims. That's because India has a lot of people. And I did see growing up an Islam that is a little different than the Islam we're more familiar with in the Middle East. In other words, Arab Islam is different than Asian Islam, and Islam is a big thing. So on the one hand, I am a fierce, opponent of radical Islam. I think it's one of the main destructive forces in the world today. But I'm not an enemy of traditional Islam, because traditional Islam, remember, is an Abrahamic religion. It's not very different from traditional Judaism. It has some common affinities with Christianity. So I think that we as Christians should be careful in thinking about Islam, not simply write off the whole thing, but rather understand important geographical and historical and even theological distinctions. If you think, for example, about the suicide bombers, that's not an invention of Islam. In fact, the Japanese kamikazes were suicide bombers. There are these so-called Tamil tigers in Sri Lanka that do suicide bombing. The Muslims just learned from those guys, and suicide bombing is something that they started now, meaning more recently. Islam's been around since the 7th century. So part of what I tried to do is bring a fresh eye on Islam, just because of my own, the fact that I've had such a different window on it. And I think that there is a way to resist radical Islam while not just simply in a blanket way making Islam the enemy.
We are talking with Dinesh D'Souza, and we'll return shortly after a few messages from our sponsors.
Rebecca St. James for Compassion.
I think one of the big issues that I see in my own life, and I just see in young people, is this common selfishness. It's a complete battle to not live for self, because everything is saying, Rebecca, if it makes you feel good, do that. Please yourself. The culture is encouraging that in such a huge way. And I think compassion is an amazing way that we can be encouraged to live beyond ourselves. It's not about us, It's not about how we feel. It's more about serving Him and showing His love to a hurting world. And through compassion, you really actually get to see the need. Here is a huge need, and I can make a difference one child at a time.
To sponsor a child or to learn more, call Compassion now, toll free 877-496-7016. That's 877-496-7016.
You are listening to the Faith and Liberty Talk Show. We hope you are enjoying this week's show. After a short break to hear from our sponsor, Ohio Christian University, we will rejoin our host, Dave Garrison, and this week's guest.
Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell are coming to Ohio Christian University Monday, April 21st at 6 p.m. Get your tickets today at ohiochristian.edu for this riveting event featuring Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell. Tickets are going quickly, so secure yours now at ohiochristian.edu to meet Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell at Ohio Christian University on Monday, April 21st at 6 p.m. Made possible by Millwood Inc., the Computer Workshop, and Christian Healthcare Ministries.
Ohio Christian University is one of the fastest growing universities in the nation, offering undergraduate and graduate degree programs fully online in the areas of business, psychology, chemical dependency counseling, nursing, and ministry. You can earn an accredited, relevant, and affordable online degree, all from the comfort of your home. Now is the time to prepare for your future and earn your degree with Ohio Christian University. Call today at 855-OCU-GRAD or online at ocuonline.com.
You are listening to the Faith and Liberty Talk Show, where faith and liberty meet. Now, back to the discussion with our host, Dave Garrison, and this week's wonderful guest.
And we're back now talking with our amazing guest, Dinesh D'Souza. I'm always interested in our confirmation bias. I had to have the president of Algeria and his military forces protect me from being killed in a compound out in the Sahara Desert when I was doing a deal for Dick Cheney because they were going to attack us. We had a bus of oil workers. They pulled them over, slit the throats of 46 of our workers. And, so that kind of Islam is pretty scary to some of us. Well, let's go in another direction, thinking about some of the things that you've just already brought up, that you're an apologist, that you speak on Islam, you speak on the president and who and what he is. Haven't you become kind of like a polarizing figure, like a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul, or?
I don't even think about that so much. I have strong feelings about our particular moment in history. I feel that America's taken a long time to get here to where it is. And this American dream of ours is now a little precarious.
Yep.
And I believe that there are people in America who want to take us down a notch, partly because they have a perverted view of social justice in which it's actually good for America to be shrunken, for there to be global redistribution of wealth and power. And so the way I look at it is I've got a voice, I've got a podium, I've got something to say. Sometimes when I go to bed at night, I look at myself and I say that, I think my views are just moderate. There's nothing radical that I believe about anything. Ultimately, the conservatism, what am I trying to conserve? At the end of the day, I'm trying to conserve the principles of the American Revolution. So I'm conserving a certain kind of liberalism that is itself under attack. So, polarizing, controversial, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I don't think about that.
That's good. That'll keep you sane. How did you become the King's College president, only having a bachelor's degree?
Well, that was a bit unusual because I didn't apply for that job. I was merrily doing my stuff, and I got a call out of the blue one day saying, hey, we'd like to talk to you and have you consider coming to the helm of this college with evangelical roots, but a college that was looking to establish itself in New York City and in a way be broader, not be a denominational college, but a non-denominational Christian college that would make an impact in a secular city. So I liked that idea. I still do. I'm glad to have been the King's for a couple of years. I think I helped stabilize and build that institution, which was very precarious when I got there. Look, I mean, I never was and never will be a typical administrator type. So what I'm doing now, which is the writing and the speaking and the films, in a way, it's a more natural fit for me.
But what are the roles of a college president? Because the criticism you got for that struck me as not understanding what the role is of a college president. The college president spends a large majority of their time doing what? Raising money.
Yeah, I was brought in really, at King's with some specific purposes. I mean, one was to raise the visibility of the college, and I think I did that. I mean, pretty much no one had heard of King's when I got there. Many people have heard about it now. Second, it was to raise the enrollment, and I did that. King's was faltering in the enrollment, so it boosted substantially while I was at King's. And the third was to bring in money because the college was essentially going under. It just didn't have the funds to be able to operate. And I raised many millions of dollars to stabilize the college financially. So I certainly worked hard, and I believe I did achieve the main goals that I was brought to achieve at King's.
The reason it was a little self-serving why I brought that up, and that's because people don't always understand what the various roles are. They think you've got to be some PhD or have a couple of doctorates in order to be a college president. But when you look at the actual roles of the college president, it's like the CEO of a business, and I think people misunderstand that. And visibility, raising money is all about that. And in my case, I came out of, senior leadership of Fortune 100 companies, and I'm a dean of the School of Business and Government, trying to do a lot of the very same things you're talking about. And we are able to bring things to that that sometimes we'll call them the pure academics can't do. But enough of that. I've gone from meddling to preaching, I guess, here. You've debated a number of prominent atheists. You mentioned Christopher Hitchinson and Peter Singer, and there's, I think, Michael Shermer and several others. What are the arguments that you find them making that are curiously illogical? Does that make sense?
I'm sorry. What are the arguments that are what?
They make arguments that strike a lot of us as illogical. Atheists do.
Oh, as illogical. Well, no. I think that a couple things. I mean, one thing to remember is that just as Christians are devoted to God and devoted to Jesus, you have to remember that these guys are sort of devoted on the other side. I don't mean devoted to Satan. What I mean is that they're prejudiced against God. They don't want to believe in God. They don't like the idea of a divine authority issuing commandments and telling them how to live their life. So that's their starting point.
Yeah.
Given that, they're looking in the world and they're trying to find a self-sufficient explanation for everything that there is, so they don't have to infer God. Remember, God is to be, in a sense, inferred, and what I mean by that is that God's invisible, right? God's not present to us in a sort of public, visible way, the way that a rock is or a tree is. So what we have to do in our arguments is point to the world, point to the order in the world, and infer God, or talk about our experience of God, which is an inner subjective experience. And what these guys are trying to do with equal ferocity and determination is deny that this invisible God even exists. Or to claim that this subjective experience that Christians will claim is somehow just a hallucination. It's your experience, but experience doesn't really count unless it can be put in such a way that other people can scientifically measure and verify it. So this is kind of, you got to get where these people are coming from, and they're coming from a position where they don't want to believe.
Right. I think that came out in that Expelled Intelligence movie with Ben Stein, where he's interviewing Richard Dawkins, and he finally says to Dawkins, how, and this isn't the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of, so we had all these inorganic chemicals or whatever, and it sprung into life. What was the agent? What was it that caused that springing into life? And do you recall what he said? You maybe didn't see the movie.
Yeah, no, I remember the scene very well. I know Ben Stein, and of course Dawkins said something about aliens bringing life to Earth from other planets.
Seeded it, yeah.
Which sounds absolutely crazy. I mean, it's not as crazy when you look at it from their point of view. See, from their point of view, the universe has been around an awful long time. And, we know just from flying, from meteors and asteroids that there is interstellar exchanges of rocks and things like that. So it is conceivable that an asteroid could have come from another planet containing certain types of life-bearing compounds and struck the Earth. Now, this is far-fetched. But see, their point is that things that are far-fetched over many, many millions and millions of years become probable. So in a way, this atheist argument is using the Darwinian concept of deep time to make implausible events plausible.
Well, that's why I brought up curiously illogical. And when you start telling people, well, aliens seeded the planet, that becomes, the outcome of that is, well, any theory but God, Let's move into another little area. A lot of times you see the media, they think that anybody that is Christian or evangelical is a conservative or Republican. Has that been your experience?
I find that, it's difficult to be a Christian, I think, and not be conservative on some of the moral issues. And so there is a clear common ground between Christianity and conservatism. But I think that the affinity is actually deeper, because conservatism, like Christianity, is based on, I would call it, the skeptical or low view of human nature. And conservative institutions like capitalism are based on the idea that human beings are a certain way. So, for example, in my opinion, the moral case for capitalism is that it tries to civilize greed in much the same way that marriage civilizes lust. So these are human emotions. They're part of human nature. You can't get them out. But what you can do is try to channel them in a way that makes them work well, makes them work to the betterment of family and community and society. And so conservatism is built on this realistic perception of human nature, whereas, guys like Obama have a different view. So Obama will say stuff like, he'll start yelling at businesses to go hire people. Or he'll start, ordering people to work harder. So this is sort of the view that, that human nature is plastic, that people are willing to work without reward. The idea is that, we're all in this together, and that's just a different view. So I think ultimately it's a philosophical chasm between the two sides.
Well, that lends me to that statement that he made in 2008. We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming America. What did it mean, do you think, as much as you've researched him?
Well, don't even know where to get started on Obama, but I've written 2 books on him now, and I'm really done with that guy. But my latest one, Obama's America, I think it's an eye-opening book because while it came out in 2012, it's very good to read now and see how the argument of the book holds up in the light of what Obama's actually been doing. Or even if you watch 2016, we make some prophecies in that film about Obama, and you see that they're just coming to pass one by one. I mean, that guy is almost like, an actor who's playing out the script that we wrote for him in that film. And that's because Obama is not like Clinton. He's not a mercurial guy. He's a deeply ideological guy. He's shaped by the influences that have shaped him. He's like the toy soldier who walks into the wall and keeps going.
We are talking with Dinesh D'Souza, and we'll return shortly after a few messages from our sponsors.
Michael W. Smith for Compassion.
I cannot begin to tell you how crazy I am about compassion. I don't get involved in too many things, but I'll never forget 13 years ago I got asked to be involved with Compassion. And if I'm not mistaken, I think my answer was no, because I didn't know anything about them. But I said, I'll tell you what I'd love to do. I would love to sponsor a child, and then I would like to go see what you do. I'll never forget my first trip to Ecuador. It was just life-changing. I don't know if you've ever been to a third world country, but at some point, if you ever have a chance to go, it will change your life. But I went and saw Compassion's work and what they did nutritionally for the kids and then educationally. And then the most important thing was that they shared the gospel with these kids. And I'm convinced that there's hundreds of thousands of kids who have come to know Christ in a personal way through Compassion sponsorship program.
To sponsor a child or to learn more, call Compassion now, toll free 877-496-7016. That's 877-496-7016.
You are listening to the Faith and Liberty Talk Show. We hope you are enjoying this week's show. After a short break to hear from our sponsor, Ohio Christian University, we will rejoin our host, Dave Garrison, and this week's guest.
Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell are coming to Ohio Christian University Monday, April 21st at 6 p.m. Get your tickets today at ohiochristian.edu for this riveting event featuring Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell. Tickets are going quickly, so secure yours now at ohiochristian.edu to meet Dr. Ben Carson and Dr. John Maxwell at Ohio Christian University on Monday, April 21st at 6 p.m. Made possible by Millwood Inc., the Computer Workshop, and Christian Healthcare Ministries.
Ohio Christian University is one of the fastest growing universities in the nation, offering undergraduate and graduate degree programs fully online in the areas of business, psychology, chemical dependency counseling, nursing, and ministry. You can earn an accredited, relevant, and affordable online degree, all from the comfort of your home. Now is the time to prepare for your future and earn your degree with Ohio Christian University. Call today at 855-OCU-GRAD or online at ocuonline.com.
You are listening to the Faith and Liberty Talk Show, where faith and liberty meet. Now, back to the discussion with our host, Dave Garrison, and this week's wonderful guest.
And we're back now talking with our amazing guest, Dinesh D'Souza. For a lot of us, we're beginning to understand who he is, but he was really unknown when he came on. So how about we go at it a little bit like this? Did you ever think you would see a nation where it would order Christian bakers to bake cakes for gay couples, or forces people to buy health care, expels elementary students for pointing their fingers like a gun at people, taking the Ten Commandments off the walls, where successful business people are being vilified? Did you ever think you'd see a nation like that?
No. I mean, some of the stuff that's going on does seem to be almost surreal. There was just recently an article about how Democrats who are in trouble in the midterm elections are now calling upon the IRS to investigate the conservative groups that are supporting their opponents. Now, look, I mean, this is like third world stuff. You know, I grew up in a country where the government would unhesitatingly use the police or the army or the tax man to go after people that they don't like. And I think the Obama people are the same. I mean, they don't seem to have any compunction. They feel that they own the government, and they should be able to use the government against their opponents. It's a very troubling precedent, because the truth of the matter is that if they do this, and the next time when the other side is in power, it's going to be time to use the cops to round them up. But this is something that should be out of bounds in American politics, and unfortunately, we've crossed a bit of a line here.
Do you think we've lost our way?
Yes.
Are you optimistic about the fate of America?
Well, I'm optimistic because I think that we have a great country that is, I don't just mean that in the rah-rah sense. America is based upon some very powerful principles that are difficult to dismantle. I mean, there's, for example, the American spirit, and do what you can. I mean, I suppose over time you can gradually whittle it down, but it's not going to go away that easily. It's not going to go away in 8 years. One reason I think Obama is eager to hand the baton to somebody like him is it takes longer to remake America. And he's hoping, I think, to have 16 years, in a sense, to do the job rather than just 8.
What do you think are the most pressing issues in America?
Well, I think probably the main issue in the country now is the issue of fairness, and particularly of economic fairness. Obama has actually made that the front and center issue in American politics. He recently gave a speech saying that inequality is the main issue. Now, interestingly, the founders believed in equality, right? The Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. But at the same time, the founders were really clear that they were talking about equality of rights, not equality of accomplishments or equality of strength or speed or even moral character, not equality of income. In fact, ironically, it's equality of rights that legitimates inequality of result. In the same way that you can fairly say that a guy deserves the gold medal, or the silver medal in an Olympics, precisely because everybody started at the same line. So starting at the same line is what the government guarantees us. It's equality of rights, not equality of the result.
Yeah, outcome. But don't you think it's problematic when you have 1 out of 7 people working for the government and 70+ million people that are on some one of the 77 welfare programs?
Well, I do think that all of this needs to be, ultimately it all needs to be put on the table and re-examined, and it's not going to happen with this administration. So, at some sense, there's no alternative but to convincing a majority of Americans that this is not the way to go. The good news is that these are people, look at all the young people who voted for Obama. Now, many of those people don't have jobs. I'm not sure whether they should be blaming Obama or blaming themselves, because they put into office the guy who has essentially kept us economically stagnant for now almost 6 years. So at some point, though, people aren't stupid. They begin to realize that whatever we're doing now isn't working very well. Maybe we should try something else. In fact, we have tried something else in the past, and it's worked really well. So it's one of the American characteristics, learning from experience. And the time we stop learning from experience is the time when we are in bad shape.
David Barton has put together a website where he says that President Obama and his administration is the most hostile towards Christianity that we've ever seen in this country. Do you concur with that?
I think I would. I don't. I mean, I respect David Barton's work. I haven't seen this particular case made out by him, but I'm just thinking back. I mean, I've been in the United States now since 1978, since I was in my teens, and I can't think of an administration that was more hostile. I mean, we've certainly had Democratic administrations, but Jimmy Carter was, of course, an evangelical Christian. Bill Clinton, even though he was a creature of the 60s, it was nevertheless formed by a little bit of a Bible Belt conservatism in the South. And so he was not in a flagrant way opposed to Christianity. So, yeah, I think the Obama phenomenon is kind of unique.
If President Obama walked in your office right now, what would you say to him? What would you like to say to him?
You know, that's an interesting question. I never quite thought about that. Someone had floated the idea after 2016. Wouldn't it be interesting if Obama were to call you in? Because actually, I've got some, interesting similarities with Obama. I mean, we were both, first of all, we both have a background of having spent some time in our early years in another culture. Obama spent 3 years growing up in Indonesia. We both have dads who were part of that anti-colonial era. We both went to Ivy League colleges. We both are obviously, non-white. So we have interesting similarities, I think, and yet we have such different perspectives on America. In a way, to me, part of what's happening is Obama is the America-born guy. I'm not a birther. I think Obama was born here. But he has developed a third world sensibility. And I am the opposite. I'm like a third world guy. I grew up in India, but have chosen America and have a very American sensibility. So it would actually be very interesting, quite apart from just the sheer curiosity of sitting down with Obama, a prospect I would approach with the sort of almost like with the academic interests of a Freud, but nevertheless, above and beyond that, it'd be interesting to put our ideas side by side. But of course, it'll never happen, and I can't say I'm looking forward to spending any time with Obama. I just feel that he's got issues. Let's put it that way.
Well, maybe we could start a petition and do something like what they call it, the beer summit or something, and the two of you just have a good old time. And I appreciate you so much being on the show. You've been a fantastic guest, and thank you, and we hope to talk to you again sometime.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
On behalf of our host, Dave Garrison, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Faith and Liberty Talk Show today. For additional information about the show, please go to faithandliberty.org, where you can access previous shows, like us on our Faith and Liberty Facebook page, and access other resources. Please keep in mind that the Faith and Liberty Talk Show exists only with the generosity and support of our listeners. If the show is of value to you, we would appreciate you visiting our website, faithandliberty.org, and donating to the show. The opinions and comments represent the views of our speakers and may or may not represent the views of Ohio Christian University. May God bless you, and thank you for listening to our show.